السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. Today then we begin with the hadith of Ibn Abbas. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال: بعثني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في الثقل، أو قال في الضعفة من جمع بليل، متفق عليه. And then also عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: استأذنت سودة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليلة المزدلفة أن تدفع قبله، وكانت ثبيطة يعني ثقيلة، فأذن لها، متفق عليه. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال: قال لنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: لا ترموا الجمرة حتى تطلع الشمس. رواه الخمسة إلا النسائي وفيه انقطاع. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: أرسل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بأم سلمة ليلة النحر فرمت الجمرة قبل الفجر ثم مضت فأفاضت. رواه أبو داود وإسناده على شرط مسلم. These narrations now are going to talk about the night of Muzdalifah in more detail, and the fact that certain people are allowed to leave early. Before, when we studied the general description of Hajj, we learned that on the night of Muzdalifah you're supposed to stay there till when? Till Fajr. You're not supposed to leave, you're supposed to stay the whole of the night there. However, these narrations now are going to indicate that those who have a justification, those who have a valid reason, are allowed to leave Muzdalifah early. They are allowed to leave early and do not need to stay the whole of the night. As Shaykh Al-Fawzan says here, regarding the narrations, the first of them, which was the narration of Ibn Abbas, where he said that the Messenger of Allah sent me with the weak people to leave. And in another narration, that Sauda sought permission from the Messenger to leave from Muzdalifah before he does, and she was given permission. And in another narration, the Messenger mentioned, do not do the stoning until the sun rises. And in another narration, that the Messenger sent Salama on the night of slaughtering, meaning the day before Eid, i.e. that is the night of Muzdalifah, that night. And so she went and did the stoning before Fajr. And then she continued to the tawaf. So all of those narrations are talking about, in some way or another, leaving Muzdalifah early and doing the stoning early. As Shaykh Al-Fawzan says, هذه الأحاديث كلها تدل على أنه يجوز لأهل الأعذار الانصراف من مزدلفة بعد منتصف الليل رفقا لهم. That these narrations indicate it is permissible for those who have a reason to leave Muzdalifah after the middle of the night, to make it easier for them. Because in the morning after Fajr, when everybody goes, obviously there will be a lot more people, a lot more crowding. So to make it easier for those who are weak, etc., they can leave early after the middle of the night ahead of the crowds. وَأَهْلُ الْأَعْذَارِ, and the people who are excused and have a valid reason to do that are, for example, the sick. If there were any people who were sick or had become ill during Hajj, then they have a reason to leave early on the night of Muzdalifah to avoid the crowds and get ahead of everyone. Or kibaru sin, those who are elderly in age. Those who are elderly in age, then they likewise can leave early. وَالْأَطْفَالِ الَّذِينَ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ الزَّحْمَةِ, and also very young children who would not be able to cope and handle in the crowds, very young children who would not be able to manage in all of the crowds, then they are allowed to go as well early, obviously with their guardians. فَرَخَّصَ لَهُمُ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ أَنْ يَدْفَعُوا مِنْ مُزْدَلِفَةَ إِلَى مِنَى بَعْدَ مُنْتَصِفِ اللَّيْلِ. So those kinds of categories of people, those who are weak and ill, those who are elderly, those who are very young, the weak categories generally, then they are allowed to leave after half of the night and do not need to stay the whole of the night in Muzdalifah. هذا من باب الرخصة, and that is the exception from the standard rule. The standard rule is you are supposed to stay in Muzdalifah the whole night till Fajr. That's the default rule. The rukhsa is the exception, what is allowed outside of that default rule. And what is allowed outside of that default rule is that the weak ones can leave early after the middle of the night. أَمَّا الْأَقْوِيَةِ, as for those who are not in those categories of weakness, and neither are they attached to anyone in the categories of weakness, because if you are attached to someone in the categories of weakness, then you can go with them. There is somebody, you have your elderly parents with you, for example, and they are from the categories who are allowed to leave after the middle of the night. So you can go with them to take them. Or very young children who are from the categories, then the parents can obviously go with them, even though the parents themselves may be fit and strong and healthy and not in any of those categories, but they are attached to someone who is in that category, so they are allowed to go with them. But otherwise, a fit, healthy person who has no other justification, then they should not leave. And they are supposed to stay all of the night in Muzdalifah up until they pray Fajr the next morning and the light begins to appear. That's when they are supposed to go. That's what we mentioned earlier. You stay the whole night, pray the Fajr. When the light appears, then you head off. For the fit and healthy who have no justification of weakness, then they are not supposed to leave. They are supposed to stay, pray Fajr, and then leave in the morning. واختلف العلماء هل هذه الرخصة بالانصراف بعد نصف الليل خاصة بالضعفاء أو يجوز لجميع الحجيج أن ينصرفوا بعد منتصف الليل. So there is a discussion between the scholars as to whether this exit from Muzdalifah after the middle of the night is only for those who are weak and those attached to the weak, or can someone who isn't in any of those categories, not even attached to any of those categories, can someone of perfectly good health and strong generally, can they go anywhere as well? If they decided to avoid the crowds, could they go after the middle of the night as well, and would their Hajj be okay? Or is this absolutely specific to only those who have reasons to leave? There are differences between the scholars on that point. So some scholars, they say, this is the first opinion, two main opinions. The first opinion is that it is technically permissible for anyone to leave after the middle of the night. That it is permissible for anyone really to leave after the middle of the night. But those who don't have a justification and a reasoning, it's better for them to stay. Not that it's a must or obligatory for them to stay. So the first opinion is أنه يجوز لجميع الحجيج أن ينصرفوا بعد منتصف الليل. That it is permissible for all of the Hajjis, anyone who wants to go after the middle of the night can go. ولكن الأفضل للأقوياء أن يبقوا. But the better thing to do for those who have no justification, they are strong, fit, healthy, better for them is to stay. وَلَوْ فَعَلُوا وَانْصَرَفُوا لَجَازٍ. But if they decided that they just want to go, avoid the crowding, etc., then it is permissible. It is permissible. But it's better for them to stay. So according to the first opinion, it is not an obligation to stay the whole night. According to the first opinion, as long as you stay half of the night, you have fulfilled what you need to do in Muzdalifah. And you can leave after that, whether you are from the people of reasons or without reason. But if you're without reason, they do say it is better for you to stay, because the Prophet ﷺ stayed. So that's the first opinion. The second opinion of the scholars is أن هذه الرخصة خاصة بالضعفاء. That this permission to leave after the middle of the night is specific only to the people who have justification. The weak people, the ill, the elderly, the children, those who have a reasoning, they are from the categories of the weak people generally, then they are the only ones allowed to go. أما الأقوياء فيجب عليهم البقاء في مزدلفة حتى يصلوا الفجر ويصفروا جدا ثم يدفعوا إلى منى. كما فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لأن الرخصة للضعفاء تقتصر عليهم، أما الأقوياء فيكملون الليل لفعله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقوله خذوا عني مناسككم. So the second opinion is that it's only allowed for those who have a justification, and the strong who are attached to someone with a justification, then they can go with them to help them along, etc. But as for anybody else from the healthy and fit, with no reasoning of their own, neither do they have to guard over and are attached to somebody with a justification, then for them, according to the second opinion, it is impermissible for them to leave until they complete the full night and pray Fajr, and then they can go as the Prophet did. That's the second opinion. Al-Shaykh Al-Fawzan says, in his opinion, Al-Qawl Al-Awwal Huwa Sahih, Insha'Allah. He says, Insha'Allah, the first opinion is the correct opinion. That it's not actually considered an obligation of Hajj to have to stay the whole of the night in Muzdalifah. And that you can leave if you have a reason, or even if you don't, you can leave after the middle of the night. وأنه يجوز ولكن الأفضل للأقوياء استكمال الليل. But as they said in the first opinion, it is far better if you have no reason to leave that you don't leave then. Stay and complete the full night in Muzdalifah. ولو انصرفوا بعد منتصف الليل صح لهم ذلك وأدوا النسك وهو المبيت بمزدلفة وأقله إلى منتصف الليل. But if someone, according to that first opinion, strong, fit, healthy, no reason to go, still goes anyway, after the middle of the night, his Hajj would be valid. He has completed what is upon him in spending time in Muzdalifah, and the minimum time to be spent there is up until at least half of the night. Up until at least half of the night. Once half of the night has been done, then it is permissible for anyone to leave if they wanted to leave, but it's far better to do it in accordance to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and stay the full night, unless you are one of the people with a reasoning to leave. كما دل الحديث على أن الأقوياء إذا دفعوا بعد منتصف الليل فإنهم لا يرمون الجمرة لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لابن عباس وكان صغيرا أرسله بالثقل يعني بالأثاث وهو أثاث المسافر يقال له الثقل وقال له لا ترموا حتى تطلع الشمس فدل على أن القوي وإن جاز له أن يدفع من مزدلفة بعد منتصف الليل فإن الأفضل له أن يؤخر الرمي وأما العاجز فيجوز له أن يرمي بعد منتصف الليل كما فعلت أم سلمة رضي الله عنها كما في الحديث والأكمل في حق الأقوياء أن يكون رميهم بعد طلوع الشمس وإن جاز لهم الانصراف من المزدلفة بعد نصف الليل وإن رموا مع الضعفة بعد نصف الليل فرميهم يكون مجزئا ولكنه خلاف الأفضل. So now we have spoken about the permissibility of leaving after half of the night. When you leave from Muzdalifah, you're supposed to go and do the 4 actions that we mentioned of the day of Eid. The 4 actions are the stoning and the shaving and the slaughtering and then the tawaf. The first of those for most of the people is going to be straight away to the stoning. So if you leave after the middle of the night, are you allowed to go immediately and stone in the night? Do the stoning in the night. It hasn't even got to the day of Eid, the 10th day of the Hijjah. You're still in the night of that day. Can you go and stone? Shaykh Al-Fawzan says these narrations seem to indicate that the ones who have a reason to leave Muzdalifah, those with a justification to leave, then they are allowed to go and do their stoning. But the ones who do not have any justification to leave, according to the first opinion, even people without a justification can go if they want. Those ones who go without a justification, they should not stone until after sunrise. That's what the Shaykh says the narrations seem to indicate. That according to the first opinion, let's go upon the first opinion for now, that anybody is allowed technically to leave after the middle of the night. But then they say, even though everybody is allowed to leave after the middle of the night, avoid the crowding, get back to Mina early, only the ones who had a reasoning and justification to leave are allowed to go straight away and stone. The ones who just left but without any weakness or justification of those reasons, they shouldn't actually go and stone. They should wait and stone in the morning after sunrise. And they say that's based upon these narrations here. There is the narration of Sauda when she sought permission to go and she was given permission to go. And then it's mentioned in the hadith of Ibn Abbas how the Prophet ﷺ told them do not stone until after sunrise. But then in the hadith of Salama that she stoned before sunrise. So some narrations saying they stoned before sunrise. Some saying they were told not to stone until after sunrise. As Shaykh Al-Fawzan says, the combination between those narrations is the ones who are weak, they left because of a reasoning of weakness, they can go and do the stoning. But as for the others who left for some other reason, not for weakness or anything, but upon the first opinion they're allowed, so they went, They are not allowed to stone though. They can leave Muzdalifah, but they have to wait and stone after sunrise. That's what Ibn Abbas was told to do in the narrations, and some of the scholars in some of the versions of the narration, it mentions that he had left not because of weakness or anything. He had left because he was carrying all of the goods, all of the gear. He was the one carrying it all, so he was told to leave earlier for the sake of carrying all of the possessions and the goods and things that they had. He was carrying all of those things and the items for the camels and those types of things. So he was allowed to leave early. Not because he's from weakness or any of the people of weakness. So he was told, you can go, but don't do the stoning until after Fajr. So that's what Shaykh Al-Fawzan mentions here. The weak who left can stone, but the strong who left should not stone until after sunrise. What if somebody from the strong, not from any of the categories, who left based upon the first opinion, went and ended up stoning straight away as well? Would it count or not? Shaykh Al-Fawzan says it would count. It's again one of those things where he should not do that. It is in opposition to the sunnah for someone with no reason to go and stone before sunrise on that 10th day. But if he did, then technically there's nothing to indicate that it's invalid. It would still be valid, his stoning would count, and it would be valid, but it's in opposition to the sunnah, in opposition to the way that he should have done his hajj. وَدَلَّ عَلَىٰ أَنَّ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ سَوَاء. And in terms of who is allowed to leave Muzdalifah early, there is no difference between men and women. Men can be in the weak categories, elderly men, sick men. Men can be in that as well as women, there is no difference in that. أذن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لابن عباس وهو من الذكور وأذن لسودة أم المؤمنين وهي من النساء وكانت ثبطة يعني ثقيلة الجسم أي بحاجة إلى الانصراف فدل على أن الرخصة عامة للرجال والنساء فإن كان الكل ضعفه جاز لهم الانصراف والرمي بعد نصف الليل وإن كان بعضهم قويا جاز لهم الانصراف والأفضل أن يؤخر الرمي إلى بعد طلوع الشمس وإن رمى بعد نصف الليل أجزأه ذلك وصح منه والحمد لله. So the Shaykh says, because in the narrations Ibn Abbas was allowed to leave, Salama was allowed to leave, it indicates there is no difference between men and women in that ruling of being able to leave after the middle of the night. Whoever comes into the justification of being able to leave is allowed to leave. And according to the first opinion, a justification isn't even needed. Anyone can leave and it would still count, even though it's better for them to not leave if they have no reason. And also the ones who then left with a reason, they can stone straight away, and the ones who left without a reason shouldn't stone, but if they did, then it would count. But it's better for them to wait until after sunrise. كما دلت هذه الأحاديث على أن المبيت في مزدلفة واجب لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يرخص إلا للضعفة فإنه يكفيهم من المبيت إلى منتصف الليل. So the narrations also indicate that one of the obligations of Hajj is to spend the night in Muzdalifah. It's not like anybody was allowed to go straight from Arafah and bypass Muzdalifah. You have to go to Muzdalifah and you have to spend the night there. And the minimum time for spending the night there is half of the night. Half of the night must be spent there, and then a person could leave thereafter. Then, عن عروة ابن مضرس رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من شهد صلاتنا هذه يعني بالمزدلفة فوقف معنا حتى ندفع وقد وقف بعرفة قبل ذلك ليلا أو نهارا فقد تم حجه وقضى تفثه. رواه الخمسة وصححه الترمذي وابن خزيمة. This narration regarding Urwah ibn Mudarris radiyallahu anhu, And he was one of the companions who had arrived late for Hajj. He had arrived late. And he did not know where Arafah was. كان لا يعرف عرفة فكان يقف عند الجبال يتحرى عندها عرفة. So he was standing next to the mountain looking for Arafah. ثم أدرك النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في المزدلفة في صلاة الفجر. Then he bumped into the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, came across the messenger, met up with him at Muzdalifa Fajr time. فسأله عن ذلك. So then Urwah ibn Mudarris asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about that, about his situation, that he got there late and he was in Arafah trying to find Arafah, and then he spent a little time there and came to Muzdalifah now, and what's the ruling on how he's done things. And so when he came to the messenger asking him وأنه كان يتحرى عرفة ولم يعرفها فوقف في عدة أماكن من باب الاجتهاد فهل يجزيه حجه. So he came to the messenger telling him that he arrived late. So he went to Arafah and he was looking for Arafah and he didn't know exactly which part Arafah is, where Arafah starts. So he'd been standing at various locations here, then there, hoping that he had entered into Arafah at some stage. So he came to the messenger and told him this is what happened. That he came late, he went, he didn't know exactly where Arafah was. So he stood at one place, then he went to another place. He stood at a few locations hoping to have caught Arafah in his standing. So he came to the messenger asking, what's the ruling on my Hajj? So the messenger said to him, Man salla salatana hadihi, that whomsoever prays this prayer of ours, the Fajr in Muzdalifah, وَبَقِيَ حَتَّى نَنْصَرِفَ, and remains until we leave, وَكَانَ أَدْرَكَ قَبْلَ عَرَفَ لَيْلًا أَوْ نَهَارًا فَقَدْ صَحَّ حَجُّهُ وَقَضَى تَفَثُهُ فَدَلَّ هَذَا الْحَدِيث عَلَى مَسَائِلْ عَظِيمَةٍ. The messenger said to him, whoever catches this prayer of ours, Fajr in Muzdalifah, and prior to that has caught an amount of time, whether in the day or night, in Arafah, has been to Arafah for an amount of time, whatever that amount of time may be, he has been to Arafah, night or day prior to Muzdalifah, and has spent something in Arafah, then has come to Muzdalifah, then his Hajj will be legitimate and valid. What does this mean exactly? Firstly, the Shaykh says, it means أن المحرم إذا وافى عرفة, that if a person in Ihram ends up in Arafah and does his standing in Arafah, even if he didn't really know where Arafah was, this companion was out there searching for it and he didn't know exactly which part is Arafah, so he was standing here, there, going here and there. As long as he caught some of Arafah, was in Arafah, وَوَقَفَ فِيهَا وَهُوَ لَا يَعْرِفُهَا أَجْزَأُهُ ذَلِكَ, then it would count. So with Urwa ibn Mudarris, he had actually ended up in Arafah. He was looking for it and he had actually ended up in Arafah. So even though he didn't know it, that's why he came to the messenger saying, I don't know if I was actually in Arafah, but I was in this location, that location, and it was the location of where Arafah is. So even if the Hajji didn't know, but it turns out he was in Arafah when he describes where he was, then his Hajj will count. He's been to Arafah. Even if he didn't know where it was and he was looking for it, it turns out factually he was in Arafah, then that will count for him. As is the case, or was the case with Urwa ibn Mudarris. He had in his search ended up in Arafah. ودل على أن الوقوف بعرفة يمتد من طلوع الفجر يوم عرفة إلى طلوع الفجر يوم النحر. The hadith also indicates that you can catch Arafah and do your time in Arafah any point all the way up until the Fajr of Muzdalifah. The 8th day of Dhul Hijjah, we were in Mina. The 9th day in the morning, you go to the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, you go to Arafah. Go to Arafah. After Maghrib, from Arafah you go to Muzdalifah. So we're on the 9th day. On the 9th day in the evening, you go to Muzdalifah and then spend the night there. In the morning after Fajr, which is now the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, you head off and do the stoning and those 4 things. If a person missed Mina, missed the 8th day of Dhul Hijjah, missed the whole day of Arafah, he ends up landing there, getting there, finally making his way there, and it's maybe 1 a.m. on the night of Muzdalifah. Everybody, all the Hujjaj have left Arafah, they are spending the night in Muzdalifah right now, and he just gets there. What's the first thing he needs to do then? Go to Arafah. He's not going to come and join in at Muzdalifah, because if you do that, no Hajj. Without Arafah, no Hajj. If he gets there 1 a.m., 2 a.m., all the Hajjis have come to Muzdalifah, they are spending the night there now. Some of them have even left and gone to do stoning and other things. He just arrives. First thing he's going to have to do is go straight to Arafah. Spend some time there and then come and do his Fajr in Muzdalifah and then proceed as usual with everybody else, and his Hajj counts. As long as he goes and catches Arafah before the Fajr of Muzdalifah, the Fajr of the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, then his Hajj will count. Dalla ala anna al-wuquf. So going to Arafah and spending your time in Arafah, that can be done all the way up until the Fajr of the 10th day. ووقف بعرفة قبل ذلك ليلا أو نهارا. ليلا يعني ليلة النحر، أو نهارا يعني نهار عرفة. والنهار يشمل طلوع الفجر إلى غروب الشمس. وهذا الرأي الإمام أحمد أن وقت الوقوف بعرفة يبدأ من طلوع الفجر، ورأي الجمهور أن الوقت يبدأ بزوال الشمس، وهذا هو الراجح من فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Some of the scholars, they believe that on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah, the time zone for standing in Arafah or spending time in Arafah begins from the 9th day after Fajr. So if a person went on the 9th day after that Fajr or after that sunrise, if a person goes to Arafah on the 9th day after sunrise and spends some time there, an hour, and then leaves, then according to the opinion of Imam Ahmad, he has covered his Arafah. But according to the majority of the scholars, the Jumhur, the time period to do your Arafah begins on the 9th day after the middle of the day, meaning basically Dhuhr. Just after the middle of the day, from Dhuhr time onwards. So if somebody went on the 9th day in the morning prior to Dhuhr, it's not Arafah time yet. You have to have done some time in Arafah from after the Dhuhr. And then all the way any time up until the following morning of Fajr. والراجح من فعل من وهذا هو الراجح من فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So this is the correct opinion from the action of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. ولكن الإمام أحمد أخذ بعموم قوله وقف بعرفة قبل ذلك ليلا أو نهارا. But Imam Ahmad took the general statement where the messenger said you can stand in Arafah, do your Arafah time, day or night. So the day begins after sunrise on the 9th and the night ends up to the Fajr of Muzdalifah. It's a full 24 hours basically according to that opinion then. But the majority of the scholars say according to the way the Prophet did the Hajj, it begins after the middle of the day on the 9th, not the morning, after the middle of the day, then carrying on up until Fajr of the next morning. فدل على أن الحاج المحرم إذا أدرك عرفة أي لحظة من ليل أو نهار في وقت الوقوف أجزأه ذلك وحصل له الركن، إلا من وقف في النهار فإنه يستمر إلى غروب الشمس كما فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، أما من وقف في الليل فإنه يجزيه أدنى وقوف ولو قليلا. If you go there during the day on the 9th, then you're not allowed to leave Arafah up until the Maghrib time. But if you go at night, like this example here, somebody comes late and they come on the night where everybody's in Muzdalifah, then you go to Arafah, how long do you have to spend there? It's not mentioned. It's not you have to spend an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. As long as you go there, spend some time there and then leave. You have caught your action and your pillar of having been and spent time in Arafah. كما دل الحديث على أن إذا طلع الفجر ليلة النحر فقد فات الحج، فمن جاء إلى عرفة بعد طلوع الفجر فإنه يكون قد فاته الحج في هذه الحال. What if somebody comes so late that even the Fajr time has gone on the morning of when they've woken up from Muzdalifah night in the morning on the day of the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, they've prayed their Fajr, now somebody arrives. Can they quickly go to Arafah now? Impossible. If they go to Arafah now, then after that they've all completely missed Muzdalifah as well. You can't go to Arafah then. Then the time for Arafah is gone. If somebody comes after the Fajr of the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, you've missed Hajj. Prior to that, you can go to Arafah and catch it. But after that, your Hajj has now been missed. And that's because the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Hajju Arafah. Arafah is the core of Hajj. It is the core of Hajj. You must go to Arafah and you must do that Hajj. Also in the narration it mentions that a person is supposed to go to Muzdalifah, but if you are late in this circumstance, you come so late that you can barely go catch Arafah, and then after catching Arafah you come back and it's Fajr time in Muzdalifah. So you've really not spent the night in Muzdalifah at all, you got there at Fajr time. Then does it count like that? That's okay. Because prior to Fajr you have caught Arafah. Prior to Fajr you have caught Arafah. Then you've come and now it's Fajr time, so you've missed the night in Muzdalifah. But having caught Arafah prior to Fajr, your Hajj is valid. And then the night in Muzdalifah, that can be dropped. That can be dropped and your Hajj would still be valid. ويدخل في هذا الآن الذين تمسكهم صلوات يسيرون في الطريق إلى مزدلفة فإنهم قد يتأخرون ولا يصلون إلى مزدلفة إلا بعد طلوع الفجر. The Shaykh says these days it happens. It's so busy when your bus leaves from Arafah. Some people in their packages, this is reality, they don't get to Muzdalifah till sunrise, till Fajr. All night they sat in their buses, in that traffic, in that jam, no movement. They don't get to Muzdalifah up until Fajr, and you can walk there in no time. A young, fit, healthy person can walk from Arafah to Muzdalifah easily. But the packages in their buses, some of them, they don't make it up until Fajr. They are stuck. It happens. So the Shaykh says if that happens, your Hajj would still be valid. You've done your Arafah, you've not been able to do the Muzdalifah because of those kinds of reasons. For example, قد يتأخرون أو بعد طلوع الشمس أو إلى الضحى فمثل هؤلاء قد فاتهم الوقوف بمزدلفة ولكن يسقط عنهم بالعذر خلاف الوقوف بعرفة إنه لا يسقط بالعذر لأنه هو الركن الأعظم. أما الوقوف بمزدلفة فإنه إذا فات لعذر فإنه يسقط عن الحاج وهذا من تيسير الله. So Arafah cannot be dropped, but if you catch Arafah prior to Fajr but then cannot catch Muzdalifah, that is okay, your Hajj would still be valid. So this narration indicates the obligation of standing in Arafah, and it mentions that it would still be valid if you then ended up missing Muzdalifah for whatever reason. That's where we'll have to leave it for today then. And inshallah we'll continue with the next hadith from next week. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.